Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
You added the investigative this week.
I go back and forth.
He earned it. I mean, this, I think,
depends on how I feel.
He earned it with this Sunday story, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Today we're going to talk about how Nelson Wolff called Greg Abbott's bluff. We're going to talk about the ongoing question of police misconduct and how it should be resolved and the problems that we have with it right now, and the status of the via sales tax, ballot measure, which Mayor Ron Nirenberg was in favor of a few months ago, but has since moved away from as a result of COVID-19 and the economic problems that we're facing. I think when we left things off last week, Nelson Wolff, the county judge, had sent a letter to Greg Abbott asking that local officials have the freedom to impose mask regulations to protect people from COVID-19. Greg Abbott had stated in an executive order that local communities could not punish people for not wearing masks. And Nelson Wolff was just saying, let us deal with this. Give us the leeway to do that. Greg Abbott didn't want to do it. Nelson Wolff called his bluff and decided to issue an executive order anyway. This one specifically targeting businesses and saying that businesses had to make sure that both their employees and their customers wore masks on the premises, and if the businesses did not comply, that there could be up to a $1,000 fine. Greg Abbott, to the surprise of everyone, said, "Well, that's okay with me." He found a loophole. As long as you're doing it, to businesses and not putting this regulation on individuals, we're okay with it. What? I'm curious what all of you thought. What was your first reaction when Greg Abbott basically decided not to challenge Nelson Wolff on this?
I mean, my first reaction was that he just saw the writing on the wall that things are going in the wrong direction, and he made a decision to kind of put the accountability back on local officials.
Yeah, I kind of saw it as for Greg Abbott, he was able to find a middle ground between like what was needed as far as trying to slow down the spread of the virus and maintaining his base. I mean, really, right. That's what it all comes down to. I mean, his unwillingness to allow Texas mayors the ability to require masks. I think that was Greg Abbott playing to his base. But yet he understands, I think, the severity of the problem, the fact that, these cases are spiking dramatically and that, masks help slow it down. He understood that. And I think this was probably the best way of addressing like both concerns, I guess. But he's still taken, from his right wing and public health advocates, but he's still taking a lot of crap from, Empower Texas, or Empower Texans and other Tea Party related folks. They've been all over him the last 5 days or so.
Right. Well, I mean, one way of looking at it is that he hasn't maybe been he avoided taking some of the level of attack that Nelson Wolff, for instance, might get, but I don't think he's really satisfied anybody. I mean, I think people on the left are looking like, you passed the buck and you were just trying to find a way out of this. And then some people on the right are still kind of blaming him, as you said. Were you going to say something, Josh?
Yeah. And he also said last week, basically like, oh, Nelson Wolff figured it out. Like it had been my plan all along. Yeah, that county officials could do this. It's a good job.
But his name is the Riddler.
But at no point, as far as we know, at no point did he ever make that clear to county leaders. Did he make that clear to mayors? Clearly, they didn't know about it because they had to keep sending him letters saying, let us put in masks or require masks.
I think that's just an indication of how tied he is to the far right. I mean, this is the base of the Republican Party. For him to actually guide local officials to say, look, I mean, I'm not going to allow, mandates for, on individuals to wear masks, but businesses are okay. Like, he's not going to say that because he would have been pummeled even more than he has been.
And where is Ken Paxton now? Remember when he sent his letter excoriating local officials for going too far with their stay-at-home orders, and
that included. Yeah, that included businesses. I mean, when he wrote that letter to Ron Nirenberg last month, he was saying, you're defying because there was a short period there when the local executive orders from Nirenberg and Wolff went farther than Abbott after Abbott stated that you couldn't punish people for not wearing masks. And Ken Paxton wrote this letter and said, he specifically mentioned the fact that you're putting mandates on businesses that are not allowed. So Greg Abbott is basically not consistent with Ken Paxton here, and I think that as you all were talking about, I mean, it's kind of absurd if the governor thought that there was this way of getting around his order, and he kept it to himself and decided not to tell any local officials about it and was leaving it up to them to try to figure out. It makes no sense. But as you said, Greg, I mean, we've seen the case numbers. The spike has been incredible. Sunday, we had 538 new confirmed cases, which, to put it in context, a little more than a week before that, we had 230, which was the one-day record up to that point. And just in the last week, we've had, I think, at least a couple of days over 400. Lauren Karuba, who covers health issues and has been doing an incredible job, she mentioned on Twitter that on June 10th, we had 108 hospitalizations with COVID-19. 11 days later, we were up to 400, and I think we were up to like 406, nearly quadrupling that. So, I mean, Greg Abbott sees what's happening. It's not just in San Antonio. It's in other parts of the state, and he sees what's happening, and he's probably nervous about it. But as you said, Greg, he doesn't want to. He wanted to find some way out of this without doing anything himself.
Well, he's got a 2 p.m. press conference today to talk about this. So I'm curious what the news is going to be today, because things are trending very poorly.
And as of the time that we're recording this, it could change between now and this afternoon. But he has excluded the San Antonio Express News and the Houston Chronicle from that press conference, as I understand. Maybe that will change in the next few hours.
That's a common practice by Abbott. He's very unfriendly to the press. That's not new. Yeah.
Brian, I want to talk to you a little bit. You had a great Sunday story, front page story on what's really a hot button issue, the issue of police misconduct, and how the problems that the San Antonio Police Department has in imposing disciplinary measures on police officers. And your story came out just a few days after we got the news that Matthew Luckhurst, who is a former police officer, and a lot of people in the community will remember that he's the officer who offered a feces sandwich to a homeless person in 2016. And he was terminated at that time by Police Chief McManus. And you had an arbitrator who reinstated him because there were questions about the timeline and when this incident had happened, and it was determined that more than 180 days had passed, and because of the collective bargaining requirement, that it was not possible to impose this discipline on him after 180 days. So he was reinstated. There was another incident. I don't really want to go into the details about it. It was a really gross incident, and Matthew Luckhurst, I think, there's evidence that he has some sort of obsession with I think the excrement.
Word is scatological.
Yeah, there is definitely a scatological streak there. But without going into all the details, there was a second incident, and I think that was he was suspended again. And I think the arbitrator did the right thing. Yeah. Apparently,
he's triggered by Ryan Gosling and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I don't know if y'all caught that detail in the story, but
no. What
you didn't see that at the end.
What was the connection there?
Well, when he did the horrible thing that he did in the women's locker room at the downtown bike patrol office, he explained to police investigators that he did that because they had a poster of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Ryan Gosling up in the locker room, and he thought that the women were trying to communicate to the males that they weren't good looking or strong enough. So it was an act of vengeance.
Well, as long as he had a good reason, that's the thing. But the story
anyway,
the story did Sunday.
The larger issue. Yeah.
You looked at.
I can just get into it. Yeah. So the larger issue is that there's a system in place, and it's been in place for a long time, in which officers who get fired by the police chief, William McManus, they have the option to appeal to a third party, defined as a neutral arbitrator. This is not only in the collective bargaining agreement between the police union and the city, but also in state law. And these arbitrators have a lot of authority, and that's what I tried to highlight in my story, is that they have this sweeping authority to override the police chief's decision and make a final and binding decision. So you had some cases where McManus had decided to fire officers, for example, using the N-word while detaining a black prisoner. They're actually, I put two examples of racist behavior, alleged racist behavior that resulted in firings, where two separate arbitrators came in for these two separate cases and reinstated the officers. And their excuses, I quoted their excuses from these award documents, and they're usually pretty interesting. I think in general, they just, in both cases, at least for the racist behavior, they excused the officers. They said they probably didn't really mean it. They were just having a bad day. One of the officers was drunk at the time. He was probably just angry, trying to hurt the feelings of the other guy.
Yeah.
So it's pretty. It was just interesting to me that we have these reforms taking place. For example, in the wake of George Floyd's killing by a Minneapolis police officer, where all officers in Texas are now required to complete implicit bias training. Yet you have explicit bias that officers are, saying these racist things to prisoners, yet you can't fire them because they have this right to appeal to arbitrators who often reinstate them for dubious reasons.
One of the things that was really fascinating to me, and I don't know if how many people in the community know this, is the way that arbitrators will look to similar cases for precedent in the same way that I guess judges or juries will, and you will have a case where somebody got a slap on the wrist for something, and the arbitrator will look at a current. I think this might have come into play with that officer who threatened to kill his girlfriend. Maybe it was a different situation, but there was one where clearly he got a slap on the wrist, and the arbitrator's justification was, well, yeah, but this is consistent with what happened with a similar case, elsewhere. So we're just trying to be consistent about it. And it just seems it's a really horrible pattern that's been established on this.
The logic there was that, okay, so there was actually Chief McManus's former driver at the time he was his driver. He was involved in a domestic assault incident, and McManus suspended him, I believe, for 90 days. And so this arbitrator's logic was, since you didn't fire that guy, then you can't fire this other officer for threatening to kill his girlfriend. And so to me, the logic there is McManus can never fire anyone for any domestic violence incident ever again, simply because there was one case in which he didn't, and which is obviously flawed logic. And McManus, I quoted him in the story saying that obviously every case is different, and you judge every case on its own merits.
So I'm guessing, I know McManus would like to see changes in the next collective bargaining agreement where there as the process goes forward, disciplinary process goes forward, they're able to look at the totality of someone's record, or at least more of their record, and certainly have more time to issue disciplinary actions. So, what are they looking for on the state level? Is it to change the arbitration process, or what are they hoping to see there?
Right. Well, I don't know how they're going to approach this. I mean, when we spoke with McManus, when the San Antonio Express News editorial board spoke with Chief McManus and City Manager Eric Walsh, I think someone asked the question, what's the best step forward? And they did not have a lot of faith in changing state law for whatever reason. I mean, I think there could be changes you can make to the collective bargaining agreement. I mean, negotiations began in January, I believe. Or February of next year. Right. And actually an expert I spoke to for the story, he wrote an article in a law journal that kind of highlighted some potential remedies for this problem. And one of them is to just scale back the authority of arbitrators. There's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, actually, they're not allowed to modify any discipline if they find that the facts contained in the allegations are true. So their role is basically confined to a determination of facts. And if the internal investigation, if the findings of a police investigation internally are true, then the arbitrator can't change the judgment or modify the judgment of the police chief.
That would probably have a big impact. Before we move to the next topic, I had to bring up the fact that in your story, there was a quote from Mike Kelly, who is the outgoing president of the San Antonio Police Officers Association. And I think by way of defending a police officer who had used the N-word, he compared it to Mayor Ron Nirenberg at a recent Black Lives Matter rally, stating, "I'm the mayor of this goddamn city." And Helly seemed to make the argument that these words were comparable, or what Nirenberg said was just as offensive as an officer using the N-word. Any thoughts from you all on?
First of all, we got to give props to Mr. Fechter here, because he's the one who got that quote.
Good job, Josh.
Yeah. Mike Helly won't talk to me anymore, but. I mean, that's obviously that upset a lot of people, right, Josh?
Yeah, I put the quote on Twitter basically, and it's racked up sort of like hundreds of retweets, which I guess is an indication that people are pretty angry about the state of things. But one thing I want to point out, and this is something you can't really point out in a story, is that when he started talking about that, it was unprovoked. I didn't ask him about that. He just started bringing that up out of nowhere, just kind of like, talking about how he sort of think McManus sort of rules as a monarch, which to me, suggests sort of a major disconnect between it's kind of like a read the room. Do you think like right now is a good time to be reminding people of this? Because I was talking to him about something else. I think actually it had to do with a drive on a petition drive that's about to get going. That's basically looking at a ballot initiative to basically take away collective bargaining for the police union. You see city officials basically wanting to hammer out all these problems at the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. And, there's a group of activists who are saying, well, why is there a table to begin with? We can take that away by vote, which was the context of, I believe, our discussion. So he brought that up totally unprovoked, which means that is he reading the moment correctly?
He might be reading the rank and file, but that he's representing. But I don't see how you could say that he's he's reading the cultural moment that we're in right now in this country. It seems really out of tune with that. I mean, what do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the comment of somebody who is first of all, it's kind of obscene, but it's also very tribal. I mean, he's looking after obviously what he considers to be the police union rank and file's interest and nobody else's. I mean, we've come to expect that from Helly and Chris Steele with the firefighters union. They're gonna do what it takes, in their view, to maintain their position of leadership with these unions, and they think that's what it takes. That kind of rhetoric. I mean, it's pretty toxic.
Right, and if there's a thread connecting these first two topics we've discussed, I mean, it's in the same way that Abbott has been playing to his base. I mean, Helly and Chris Steele are always playing to their base. So before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about the situation with VIA and the sales tax question. For months we heard from the mayor and the county judge about the need to bump up sales tax revenue for VIA so we could expand public transit in the city. And the talk was that we were going to take 1/8 cent sales tax that had been going to aquifer protection and linear creeks and apply it to, or have a ballot initiative that would enable us to apply that money to VIA. And the talk was this was going to be about $40 million a year. As we've encountered all kinds of budgetary problems, and we're in this, we've been in a horrible economic situation because of COVID-19. Mayor Ron Nirenberg has backed away from that, and we're now starting to see this sort of conflict between representatives from VIA who are saying, we're losing so much revenue, and we need that sales tax money just to be able to come close to maintaining the services that we've been doing in the past, and we're not even thinking about expanding. We just need this just to be able to stay where we were. I'm guessing it's going to be a lot less than 40 million because sales taxes revenues are down this year, but they're still trying to get this to happen. Josh, what I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is that my understanding is that if the Advanced Transportation District Board votes to put this on the ballot, it can still get put on the ballot, regardless of the mayor's opinion. But I guess my question would be, what are its chances? And do we think that the mayor would just stay out of it and let the public decide, or would he actively oppose that ballot measure?
And I cannot see him actively opposing this if it goes on the ballot. And the one thing that I've been really asking myself in all of this, because we had been asking him for weeks and months, if hey, look, sales tax is down, are you still going to do this in November? And he seemed pretty adamant that he thought that this was going to be part of sort of the recovery effort. Basically saying look, we've got this major problem in that we need to expand public transit in order to sort of foment some kind of economic stimulus surge, whatever, and get rid of some of these long sort of lingering problems in terms of entrenched poverty. And he seemed to think that this was going to be a solution to that, even if he wasn't committing to the fact that this was going to be on the November ballot. He has basically indicated that, perhaps we need to wait until May to figure this out because, this sort of extended the life of the sales tax. But I can't help but wonder, if the pandemic actually changed the viability of this initiative, given that.
You mean the political viability?
Basically, you could. Is this now something that was much more viable post pandemic, given how much was revealed about how precarious the livelihoods of so many people in the city are, and that expanded public transit might have put a dent in that. Does this actually serve or stand a better chance at getting passed at at the ballot box, given all of that? That's something that I still don't quite know the answer to, but I've been wondering about that for weeks now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Greg or Brian, any thoughts on like what, if this does end up on the ballot? I mean, what in the climate that we're in, and this is an unprecedented situation we're in with COVID-19 and the effects on the economy. How receptive would people be to expanding?
Yeah, that's really tough to say. I mean, Josh is right. Like this recession, unlike any we've seen in the last couple of generations, is really exposed like just how wobbly people who are working in, for example, the leisure and hospitality industries, just how difficult it is for them to make a living, to pay rent, to pay bills, to pay food. And these are, a good deal of these make up our VIA riderships. That's kind of that's a pretty nuanced thing to take to a ballot box to make that kind of argument. I don't know that voters, I don't know that they'll understand that easily. The question is, will they look at it as, are you kidding me? You're asking me to vote on a sales tax now? Like assuming, we're still in a recession, the timing to an average voter might seem pretty off. It's interesting too, how, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, the other thing that bears repeating is that, VIA is now facing, a $126 million deficit over the next 5 years. And, you mentioned this already, Gilbert, but something that bears repeating is that, if this were to go on the ballot, it would just to basically be to cover VIA's already sort of existing costs. It's not going to be going towards expansion of any kind. So, I mean, would voters also say, could you make the case to voters that you need that sales tax money to pay for a shortfall, essentially?
Yeah, it's more of a lifeline than anything.
Yeah, which is important, but it's harder. I think it is harder politically because, I think the argument, and I think this was a big part of Ron Nirenberg's sort of platform. As he took over the mayor's position, which was that I'm going to be sort of preparing San Antonio for all this rapid growth that we're going to see over the next 2 decades, and I'm going to be the mayor that's going to like prepare us for that. And a big part of that is expanding rapid or public transit in San Antonio. And now it's really we're really debating just issues of funding just to kind of keep things where they are, and I'm sure it's a demoralizing situation for VIA, right? But it's also harder to get people excited about something like that. It is. But one way to talk about it is, if you want a full economic recovery, like if you want to make it out of this recession sooner rather than later, public transit has got to be a part of that. If we're in a position where we're cutting routes because VIA doesn't have the funding, well, guess what? That has like real world implications. Like that means people are not going to be able to get to work, or it's going to take them a lot longer, and that's going to cut into the city's productivity. That's just a fact. Yeah, and as mayor, if one of your big agenda items right now is workforce development, the argument VIA is making, and I think it's valid, is if you're trying to get people to where they can find jobs for people, but they're not going to be able to get to work, that's going to be a problem. But something that we're going to be following over the next few weeks. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you all for listening. Hope everybody's safe and well, and we'll get back with you next week. Take care.